also produced. And then, certainly with the civil rights eruptions of the 1950s, blacks as a group began to approach at least the white male middle class line. So, if we take those variations into consideration, then we're beginning to fine-tune our ability to look at and understand other people. But taking a very broad approach, simply using age as the basis and not some other discriminating factor, we can begin to see that there are some similarities with people. Those in their 60s value programmed through the 20s. It was the jazz age, a time of change. Then it collapsed. We moved to the programming of those in their 50s through the 1930s. Certainly the Great Depression significantly impacted all aspects of society. Those now in their 40s value programmed through the 1940s. The major emphasis, of course, World War II, the winning, the building of the giant economic system. Then there was a major break within the society as we moved toward the value programming of those in their 30s during the 1950s. The world changed, the good life arrived, and all of these people would be significantly different because they were literally value programmed differently. Now, a very unfortunate thing is that a lot of these older people were not paying attention to what was happening to the younger people because the older people were so busy continuing to build the system. The people in their 30s with their roots in the 1950s represent a major break in the value programming within the system. People now in their 20s have their value roots from the 1960s. It was a time of change, of challenge, of turbulence, of questioning the basic values that had existed literally for centuries within this total system. Those now in their teens came from the very unusual 1970s. They're just getting ready to lock in with their gut-level values in a final form, and the 1970s represent a very low period within the system. It was sort of like the turbulence of the 60s flowed on into the 70s, and then after that sort of settled down, everyone was so bored with the whole thing, a lot of people mentally actually began the 1980s in about 1977. They were tired of Watergate, dissension, protests, so they moved mentally on to the 1980s, and with the 1980s, we have today's young children value programming. Okay, now we have once again a snapshot of the total system, and we can begin to look at some groups that exist within the system that have a lot of similarity at a gut level because of the similarities of their value programming experiences. For example, there's an extremely large group within the system that's represented by people who are now in their early 40s and older. Those people, although certainly different across this span, do have a lot of similarities with gut level values. These people we can label as traditionalists. They have always been traditionalists. They will continue to be traditionalists. They will eventually move down and check out being traditionalists. The traditional generation is very important because they're the people who really run the show. They push the buttons, call the shots, pull the strings. They are in control. Traditionalists deserve a tremendous amount of credit for having built the system, the good life, that we presently enjoy. Traditionalists also deserve perhaps some criticism for having carried on perpetuated values that are simply incompatible with the reality of the world of the 1980s. But because those values were programmed normally into these people, it is quite natural that they would continue to carry them. There's another extremely large group of people in our society that's very important who are actually now in their early 30s down to their early 20s. Early 30s to their early 20s are extremely important because there are so many of them. This is the baby boom bulge. After World War II, Americans had a lot of catching up to do, and we were very, very effective in catching up and producing all these people out there. As that bulge moves through our system, it's creating change and pressures that simply haven't been experienced before. As this generation was growing up, they were value programmed to rebel. In effect, they are the rejection generation. They grew up rejecting everything, and in turn, were typically rejected by these older generations. The rejection generation has been a thorn in the side of the traditionalists for a long time and will continue to needle them because they simply have very different gut-level value reactions to the world around them. The rejection generation, very critical because there are so many of them. Today's young people, just now value programming, we can label as the synthesis generation. These people are true synthesizers, putting together a tremendous amount of diverse information. Traditionalists are telling them one thing, rejection is telling them something else. And the synthesis people are very, very confused. The synthesis people are worried about their own future. They're extremely concerned because they know that we have some very real problems in the world. They know instinctively, because that's the way they're being programmed, that the good life has peaked. This is a generation looking forward to a future that by definition cannot be significantly better than the present we have. The quantity of the American lifestyle is inevitably going to drop. Because of resources, energy, inflation, a number of major forces will cause us to shrink in the quantity of our lifestyle. Now, the quality of our lifestyle may go up, but the quantity is definitely going to shrink. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is try to fold yourself into a brand new car. That is a signal of the shrinkage of the American lifestyle. Now, this concern has led to a lot of conservative behavior, especially within this generation just now value programming. This conservatism is responded to by traditionalists who say, oh, thank God, there's a good group back there. True, but there are also all these dings in here that are going to have to be dealt with. They are not going away, so we can't ignore them. Now, this also leads a lot of people to say, aha, the pendulum has swung. It's true. We have gone through a number of major phases with the value programming in our society. But it is very important to remember that as the pendulum swings, it is swinging through time and space. And while the behavior may look the same as it did in the past, conservative, the reasons, the needs, the values that are the roots of that behavior are very, very different than they were for the traditionalists. Okay, there's one relatively small group of people here in the middle that I left out. And typically, if I pass over them, a number of those people become very nervous, which is extremely characteristic of the in-between generation. The in-between generation is very nervous. They don't know where they belong. They were programmed by traditionalists, so they like a lot of things that traditionalists stand for, their institutions, their values. But they like a lot of things that the rejectionists have been doing. I know a lot of in-betweeners who look at rejectionists and say things like, why in the hell weren't they doing that when I was that old? Look at them running around having all that fun. In-betweeners worry constantly about just missing it. They're not for sure what they just missed, but they really worry about just missing it. Now, this generation is very erratic in the marketplace because they keep trying to find themselves. They don't know where they belong. They're really not secure with the traditionalist values or with the rejectionist values. So in the marketplace, they search frantically for self-help materials. They'll do anything involving self-help. They're into jogging. They eat a lot of bean sprouts and yogurt. They buy all these self-help books. They love, for example, Wayne Dyer's Your Erroneous Zones. Gail Sheehy's Passages, some of them read it 3 times. Because basically, all that self-help material says is, you're screwed up. But it's okay. And they go, oh, thank God. I knew I was screwed up, but I didn't know it was okay. So they are buying a tremendous amount of reassurance. Now, the in-between generation is also a very effective compromise mediating generation because they do understand both traditionalists and rejectionists, and this group of people has not been effectively utilized in our society in many organizations during the past few years. They simply have not been given the free rein by traditionalists that they should be given to act in that compromise mediating position between the very different views of the traditionalists versus the rejectionists. Okay, now we have just 4 groups of people. We don't have to look at each individual decade. The synthesis people we know would be conservative, but we don't exactly, but rather other than that, what they're going to do. The traditionalists, however, and the rejectionists have very strongly set values that they're using to relate to the world, and the in-betweeners are a compromise, a composite. So what we end up being able to do is talk about some values strongly held by rejectionists versus some values strongly held by traditionalists. For example, it's a major value. The traditionalists love the concept of the group team. They're very group team oriented because they were programmed to be group team oriented. You do not win wars, get out of depressions, build giant economic systems without a tremendous amount of coordinated cooperative effort. So naturally they like the group team. They love to get together and do things for our group. You know, do it for the company, do it for the community, do it for the country. These were the people who had the bumper stickers, America, love it or leave it. So you're either on the team or get the hell out, we don't want to have a thing to do with you. Okay, these people also like things like company picnics because they love to get together and have fun. You know, it's a commands performance. Group team orientation, very, very strong, therefore they relate to their job using that value. In contrast, the rejectionists do not believe in the group team concept. They weren't programmed to be group team members. Instead, when rejectionists are growing up, we kept telling them, you're unique, you're different, you're an individual. So the individual value is a very, very strong value for these people. Now, this is reflected, of course, in a lot of ways in their behavior. For example, rules and regulations do not apply to the rejectionists. Rules and regulations are for all these turkeys over here. The rejectionists think that they have to be considered with their own merits, their own rights, their own concerns. Something as simple as getting to work on time. I mean, these people can't get to work on time. Sometimes they can't get to work. Things come up. They just weren't together that day. Or their cat got sick. Or it snowed and the mountains called to go skiing. So if we consider their individual differences and concerns, we get along more effectively with these people. The traditionalists, they're all there, they punch in at the same time, they go through the routine. Very different response to rules, regulations, because of a difference in these major values. Now, the group team always has a leader, an authority figure. We can see the somewhat blind acceptance of authority figures in many areas of our society. For example, the law, someone telling someone what to do. If you go visit traditionally and look under the furniture in their houses, there are all these little tags hanging down. They won't tear those tags off. They think somebody is out there listening for a ripping tag. These people just rip them right off as soon as they got a hold of them, because their value view is not to go along with a do not tear unless approach. Authority figures, very important. The boss, the professor, the law. We can look at people like President Nixon. You remember President Nixon.